come to this place for magic. We come to the Bladtcast to laugh, to cry, occasionally be revolted, to pretend that you care. Because we need that, all of us. That indescribable feeling we get when the sound begins to prematurely dim, preserving that sacred runtime that is always measured in full minutes. And we go somewhere we've never been before. Not just entertained, but somehow reborn. Together. From musician interviews and unique movie reactions to stories about getting tossed off the Groove Cruise and rescued by the Canadian CIA. Dazzling conversation on tiny earbuds that repeatedly fall out, or a huge pair of Beats by Dre that never fit, but you spent $200 on them, so you wear them anyway. Sound we all can feel. Somehow, heartbreak feels good in a place like this. Our hosts feel like the best part of us, and stories feel perfect and powerful. If you feel like you're part of the episode, it's because here you are. The Bladtcast. We make podcasts better.
This is the Bladtcast, a sometimes fast-paced but usually meandering look at the world, hosted by Christian Blatt. So kick back, get ready for quite possibly the longest 1 hour to perhaps the shortest 2 hours and 56 minutes of your life. And now, here's Christian Blatt.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to our first Bladtcast of 2024. Long story, I'll tell it another time. I am Christian Blatt. This is Bladtcast number 580, and I'm so excited to welcome to the show for the very first time Cayley from Once Over with Cayley, also known as Lucy Tightbox from Who Are These Podcasts, and I welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to take the time to chat with us today, Cayley.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. I'm super excited.
I'm very excited to have you, and you got to see a little of the behind-the-scenes technical difficulties, which, as someone in the world of podcasting, you realize it happens more often than not.
It happens every time. Every time.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, thank you for being here. Take a moment and explain to people Once Over with Cayley and what they would find when they head over to your YouTube channel.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do movie reviews. I do a little bit of everything over on Once Over with Cayley. I just actually put up today a review of Hunt for the Wilder People, but I've recently done some classic horror like The Tingler. I do a lot of more modern horror, a lot of 80s horror. So there's a little bit of something for everybody over there.
Yeah, I only in retrospect do I realize now that you probably should have talked about Silent Deadly Night with Carlos Danger and I back in December. We also had on someone who wrote, he wrote the official novelization of it, and I feel like we're going to need to visit the world of Silent Night, Deadly Night every Christmas. So
every single year I watch that, and I watch the second one, which is amazing.
It's trash night. You have to watch it. It's always trash
garbage day.
That's what it is. I'm sorry.
So much. Oh no, it's basically the same movie as the first one.
Well, that's the best part of it, that it is basically the same movie. So we're here today because, we went back and forth with a few movies that we were going to talk about. And I felt like Maestro was really kind of the perfect one to talk about because you and I have both seen it now. I had an expectation of it going in, but also it's just very clear that this is one of the most Oscar bait movies. And as we're talking, it is, Tuesday, the 23rd of January. And the Oscar nominations actually came out earlier today. And I think that more than anything, it's not surprising to see that Bradley Cooper did indeed get an actor in a leading role nomination. I don't know some of these, but Paul Giamatti, The Holdovers, Cillian Murphy, Oppenheimer, probably going to win. This Jeffrey Wright, American Fiction. My wife's in the Writers Guild. Like, I've been able to watch this movie for months. I keep thinking, I got to watch it. And then, you've got your supporting actors. You've got De Niro, Robert Downey Jr.,
I'm
Ryan
very
Gosling
happy that Mark Ruffalo for Poor Things as in supporting actors. That's great news.
Yeah,
This is the
and
first time seeing this. It's very exciting.
Ryan Gosling and Barbie, and that in and of itself is not a controversial nomination,
Yeah.
except for the fact that Greta Gerwig wasn't nominated for director, Margot Robbie wasn't nominated for actress, and the film wasn't nominated. And you can nominate 10 films now, and Barbie's not one of them. The people are upset, and somebody I thought had a funny, I forget who it was, somebody I follow was just like, okay, I guess they missed the whole point of the Barbie movie, and that the guy is the only person who got nominated. And I thought it was, I don't know. Did you see the Barbie movie? I know you have
haven't.
nieces and things, so I thought you might have like had to see it. Yeah.
No, I was so excited to see it, and I kept meaning to, and I just kept getting put off and put off. But I'm super excited about it. I love Greta Gerwig. I think if anybody was going to make that movie a success, it was probably going to be her. So,
well, I have a 6-year-old daughter whose name is Lucy. That's part of the reason why I couldn't possibly call you Lucy. It's also not your name, but so I did see it. And it was the second time she had seen it. So it was a lot of like, oh, this is the part where this happens. And, oh, watch, we're going to see. I'm like, well, it's a good thing I don't care that much, about spoilers. I didn't go and see an Avengers movie with her. But so, I think it's really well done movie. I think it's very good. And I don't want to use the term to belittle it, but it's a very cute movie. And yeah, when there's 10 pictures nominated for Best Picture, you can make the case. But it's like, all right, I mean, look at the other nominees in the categories. Sometimes it has a lot to do with it,
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, look at who votes for Academy Awards. Are they people that, are going to be like, oh, the Barbie movie blew me away, So for actress in a leading role who did get nominated, I love Annette Bening when I see her and stuff. But I couldn't tell you what Niad is. Lily Gladstone for Killers of the Flower Moon. She was phenomenal. And we talked about that movie with your buddy Vinnie Paulino and some other people in the fall. And Carey Mulligan for Maestro, which, boy, are we going to talk about. And we'll see that also Poor Things. So those are lead actresses. America Ferrera got nominated in a supporting role for Barbie. So they're like, no, some of this stuff was good. So it'll be interesting. And every year we do a Oscar wrap-up show with my buddy Christian Toto from Hollywood and Toto. So you can expect more of that. But because the stuff came out today, and because there were some nominations for Maestro, I felt like we should really start with that. And, going into the movie, I don't know about you, Cayley, I didn't know that much about it. And as I texted you, I didn't even realize what it was about. I was just like, oh, I thought he was just like, a maestro, just somebody really good at music. I don't think I realized that, it was actually, it was a biopic.
Yeah.
And it did, as you can see, our visual audience can see, it did indeed get nominated for Best Picture. Steven Spielberg somewhere in there, a producer, But what did you know about Maestro going in before you watched it, Cayley?
So going in, I knew that it was about Leonard Bernstein,
Right.
And I knew that people really hated his nose prosthetic.
Yeah. When you mentioned that, by the way, that's what reminded me. I'm like, oh yeah, I did hear that it was the nose prosthetic was seemed
big
a little
controversy.
ethnic. Yeah, I guess that's one way we can put it, and then like the Anti-Defamation League, and then all of these people came out and said, no, that's not what this is.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well then what is it? That his nose wasn't Jewy enough.
Yeah,
and
that's what it was.
So it's like, just, it's, yes, you wanted to look more like him, but you wanted to look like Leonard Bernstein. And I don't know. I mean, I think he would have been too handsome if he just had that Bradley Cooper face,
It's true. I'm Jewish and I had no problem with it. Obviously, there's been much discussion about that, but I think that people get lost in the prosthetic aspect of his makeup. But that makes them almost lose the physicality in portraying the actual character, which was so amazing because he was hyper expressive, and it was great. So who gives a fuck what his makeup was,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So I didn't know that, obviously. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. So what
No,
else
that's
did I know
fine.
about this movie? I knew very, very little. I did not know a lot about Leonard. I knew that he was considered to be a triple threat. So that's kind of like my background base knowledge, is that he was a composer, a conductor, and a pianist. And I went into this movie figuring that it was going to, I kind of had guessed that it would be more about his relationships than it would be about his career.
Yeah.
But that was kind of where I started out when I started watching
Yeah.
it.
And I think that, it's interesting because the first part of the film's in black and white. Well, I guess that's not entirely true. The very beginning, it's a flashback, so it's in color. But then, like, the early part of the story is all in black and white. And I was like, oh, I don't know if the clips really made me realize that. And, to be fair, I didn't check that closely,
Yeah.
And I was very focused on the movie, but somehow I looked down and then I looked up and I'm like, oh, it's in color now. So it was just like one of those moments. But
I couldn't decide if I liked that was something that, as I look at the movie as a whole, now that I've seen it, that I really struggled with, and I don't know how I exactly feel about it. Every era was shot in the aspect ratio and in the style of the time that it was supposed to be filmed during. So that's why we got those black and white parts. That's why it changes aspect ratios at some parts. I mean, that's a cute idea, but I also feel like it kind of belittles the audience a little. So I personally struggled with that. I would rather it just all look the same. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's, yes, obviously this movie came out in theaters so that it could, qualify for an Oscar, but this is a Netflix movie. That's how you and I both saw it. And it's almost like, if it's not a Netflix movie, do you get the artistic license to play around with that? To like, well, some of it's going to be in, the old TV ratio at one point, So
the other thing that I struggled with when it comes to it being a Netflix movie, and again, you and I both watching it on Netflix, was that it looked super grainy to me, almost as if it was shot with a digital camera and then they added noise in post-production. But I learned, I like Googled this because I was like, but I thought I heard that it was filmed on 35 millimeter. Apparently Netflix has a thing that they do where they remove film noise because it saves bandwidth when they are trying to compress it. And then they will artificially add back that graininess when they are doing the decoding. And I was like, oh, so if I had seen it in theaters, it probably would have looked 1,000 times better and that wouldn't have bothered me so much.
That's interesting, and, I wonder because I saw Killers of the Flower Moon in the theater. I didn't see it on Apple. So now I'm wondering if I watched it on Apple, well, I would have been able to easily take, the 2 or 3 bathroom breaks that it required because the movie's 3 hours and 24 minutes. But also, would it have looked different? And good to see Cut of the Jib in the chat. That is a tricky situation for sure. And he's talking about how it's wonky with the compression. I never knew that. You come to this show and you learn. So thank you. And then Cayley, I had no idea that. So
I learned it today. I was like, oh, maybe it's really important to go see movies in theaters.
That's what they keep telling us, you know, and one day people will maybe start to listen. So I think that one of the things that I really liked were some of the transitions, and it's done in a way like early in the film, he's at his apartment, and yes, there is a gentleman there, and he does play Butt Bongo Fiesta on his ass, and then he runs out, and then it looks like he runs into whatever the hall is, the orchestra hall. I'm a whiz with classical music because I can't even think of what to call the building, but and then for a second I'm like, oh, is he staying in there? And you're like, no. It was just like cool. And they did a number of those, and it looked really cool whenever they would do it. When somebody walks through a door and they're just in the next place. And I mean, they did it in a way that didn't seem like a jump cut. It didn't seem super CGI. In that first one, I was just confused because I will admit that I'm not very smart, but I as the movie goes along, I think that there's actually quite a few of those. What did you think of stuff like that? So just, yes, those transitions, but some of just the visuals that Bradley Cooper was able to capture.
It actually reminded me quite a bit of Peter Greenaway's The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, where that movie is filmed almost like you're walking through an art gallery. And that can be a little bit distracting and jarring at first because you're making these transitions where you're not really sure how you got from one room to the other, even though you watched it happen and there was nothing jolting. But by the end of the movie, it just becomes so impressive. And that was one of the things that I thought that Cooper really succeeded in with this film, was that we get those really, really, really exciting ways of moving from one space to another, just like you just said. I loved it.
Right, absolutely, and I think that I just in general, I enjoy Bradley Cooper's work, and the way that people were talking about this movie, it gave me a feeling like I'm like, oh, this is going to be a huge steaming pile of dog shit, and I'm like, no, there are things quite good in this movie.
Yes.
There's a couple of things, that we'll talk about, but I feel like it works really well. And I do get put out of a little bit when people in a modern semi-realistic movie talk the way people did in movies. I'm talking about early on when he first meets, I actually forget what Carey Mulligan's Felicia. He first meets Felicia, and it's a lot of like, oh yeah, I love to go play down the music. Oh, do you? I want to do, and I'm just like, did people really talk like that? I don't think they did. I think they just did in movies. And it's almost like when they're at the party and they're in front of people, okay, you're putting on a show. And I'm like, could they just talk? Because it's like really jarring, And I don't quite know what ethnicity Felicia had. I haven't looked up. I haven't done the homework, but I feel like she probably didn't look like Carey Mulligan because she, because of her ethnicity. And by the way, in the chat, Kyle Bellardo is very excited, and Kyle is somebody that I know very well from the Who Are These Podcasts Discord, and he's one of those people who knew me from the Bladtcast before I was ever on that show. So thank you, Kyle. I'm glad you're checking us out today. So I think that some of their interactions, it's like okay, I guess, but like that early part. And they don't really talk to each other like that later. And I guess that's sort of what you're talking about, is like it's supposed to be this slice of life from movies of that era, But
I actually kind of liked that scene. I kind of saw that as him nervously courting her.
Yeah.
So when he's talking a mile a minute, I just think that it's like one of those adorable, like, I don't know how to talk to you, but I would like to. So I'm just going to keep saying words until you make me stop.
Right. Which that's the way that I talked to every woman I was interested in, right up until the time I met my wife. And then I could finally stop, and life was much better. The best thing about that scene is the performances are great, but I love the shot composition. There's this like 4-pane window between the two of them. So there's this very clear like distance between them. And then the hacky song and dance number kind of put their faces up against the window, kind of in the middle. And there's a few of those things, they're having a difficult conversation late in the movie, and it's just this really wide shot on their yard, and they're like under, I don't know, like an overhang. They're sitting on a bench, and they stay there the whole time.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, look, there's interesting choices that Bradley Cooper's making throughout this movie. How do you feel that their interaction goes? We're talking about Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan, sort of throughout, because it's a little bit of a roller coaster. And when your story is based on a true story, you kind of have to follow the blueprint,
I do think that they had a very interesting relationship. So I kind of saw the entire movie as a movie about soulmates. So I think that one thing that was really interesting is a lot of the time when somebody was gay or bisexual during this time period, they were completely repressing that and hiding it, and they were deceitful to their partner, to their wife.
Sure.
But here that wasn't really happening. She at least knew that he was bi. She, had some idea of what was going on. And I think that that is what drew the two of them so closely together, because she was accepting of who he was as a person, both on and off stage. And that, I think, is, for me, the best message of this movie.
Yeah. I think that, when you think, I don't know, it's sort of in the middle point, they're at that party. It's by the point that the film's in color, and, he gets caught, and you're like, oh, wow, is this a big deal? And she's like, I told you to be discreet, and then later on, she sort of revisits that. It's like, you're getting sloppy, it's like, you should really be discreet about this, because prior to that, it's from a slightly different time period, but it's, they've got the camera crew in their house, and it's all like they're back and forth, and like, oh, look at their family, the daughter's watching off on the side. And I did think that was kind of interesting, and when he's walking and he runs into Matt Bomer's character with his then wife, and I think the baby's with them, and he's like, "Oh, I slept with both your parents," and it's like, okay, well, it's like clearly, the artistic sets can have casual conversations that maybe the rest of us couldn't get away with. But I thought it was fairly upfront, except, in a way where I'm sure in the media it was like, okay, well, yeah, this guy's got a wife and a family. We don't even think twice.
Yep.
I mean, this is the same era where, Liberace would go on the Mike Douglas show, and it was like, Lee, why aren't you married? I just haven't met the right girl yet, Mike. And actually it was a little bit more Paul Lynde, but you know what I'm saying, and just to think about that, the idea, the time that we're talking about, and, look, later in the movie, when it's the 80s, it's like, oh yeah, it's like everything goes a little bit,
Yeah.
George Michael was on our TV all the time. So obviously everything worked in that way. But I think it's a great point about their relationship. It's built on the foundation of, this is who I am, and I trust you not to embarrass me. So she doesn't get upset when it's like, oh yeah, he's chasing after this young guy with just terrible long hair, by the way. Let's be honest. Yeah, you could do better. You're the Maestro.
If you're going to, then
if you're right, exactly. It's like you're Leonard Bernstein. There's plenty of guys that you could go up on the roof with, but it's more just like, I can't have you embarrassing me like this. And when it's a little bit later in the film, and the daughter, I think her name was Jane, finds out, that, she hears these rumors, and Felicia says, don't tell her. And he's like, all right, I would have, but your mom told me not to tell you. And he's like, no, they're not at all true. And that is really illustrates the fact where later on she clearly figures out, like, okay, he lied to me, because, he's always bringing these friends over. It's a very interesting family dynamic, Cayley.
It is. I also thought that scene was particularly interesting when he's talking with his daughter about all the gossip that's happening. His response is that people gossip when they are jealous.
Right.
And that's his explanation to the rumors. And I thought that was such an interesting take, because, again, of course, people are jealous of who he is. He has this perfect seeming life. He is a total success. He's doing amazing in all of the aspects of his career and his personal life. But perhaps that's a little bit of jealousy on his part, that he isn't allowed to share that piece of himself with everybody that he wants to.
Right. I mean, there's even a moment where, he's kind of exhausted, and he says that he doesn't want to live a lie anymore, but he has to kind of continue living a lie anyway, and I think a lot of that is very interesting as we see the balance between his work and his home life. And, one of the things that I have heard about the film is that Bradley Cooper prepared like 6 years to become a convincing enough conductor, so that explains why that one scene is so long. It's impressive. He's drenched in sweat. He gives Felicia a hug afterwards. It is an emotional moment, but I'm like, I mean, a minute, 2 minutes, there's something could have come out of that. And one of the things I love about, the internet is garbage, Twitter's trash, but every once in a while you see someone who's an actual, fan of this style of music said, he had a comment that was, oh, it took you 6 years to learn how to, and then he talks about like how his arm is too low at this point, and stuff that I don't understand. I'm just like, oh man, everybody's a bitch, no matter what you're a fan of.
I think I saw something similar that was like, you spent 6 years and you can't even hit a downbeat. Like, come on. And I have no idea if that's true or not.
Yeah,
but
no, exactly. And I don't even care if it's not true.
Yeah,
I'm just like,
so
yeah,
funny.
It would be like, it would be like if I'm criticizing a choice an actor for a superhero movie, it's like, that's what I'm going to get on my soapbox about.
And I think for me, that's where the awards bait bullshit kind of comes into play, because you didn't need to spend 6 years preparing for that. Like the vast majority of people who are watching this movie are not going to be Leonard fans. The majority of the people who are watching this movie want to see an interesting biopic, especially if it's drama or romance.
Yeah.
So why? Like you could have a year, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
You didn't need to do 6 years, and that's what makes it feel like Oscar bait to me.
Yeah, you could have gone on YouTube and just watched some videos or his old show, the actual Leonard Bernstein's old show. You could have just been like, all right, I'll figure out how to do it, And I think he's quite good, playing the ups and downs of this character, the highs, no pun intended for the drug use, which it's funny because like any movie about apparently any kind of musician needs the party where there's the mirror, the tray of cocaine, and in this one it's like over somebody's head, and I'm just like, all right, I mean, is there like a scene that you had, like this scene's in the Queen movie, it's in the Elton John movie, it's in the everything movie, and I was like, all right, it's just make this scene interesting. It's interesting, the drug use in Boogie Nights is fascinating, but here I'm just like, this is a great point from Kyle. So Lucy, you're saying Daniel Day-Lewis didn't need to be a shoe cobbler for 2 years for a movie? Ridiculous. Kyle's a great point. The idea that Daniel Day-Lewis insisted on people addressing him as Mr. Lincoln on that Lincoln movie, which by the way was very good, but it was not great. It was like, so like his family can't text him because he's Abe Lincoln. You've heard about Jared Leto on the first Suicide Squad movie. He was so into that shitty version of the Joker. Yeah. He was like playing pranks everywhere. And I was like, I don't know, just how about you work on the character and you make it good? I love the idea of an actor who it's like, oh, it's quitting time. I'm going to go home and just do regular people stuff,
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. But I think that, I know I'd like to really hook Bradley Cooper up to the lie detector test. Like, how much time did you spend? Like over those 6 years, you've made movies. All right. Did you take breaks and then you got to get back into it? Mike Moore in the Queen movie, the band tried to get him to not do drugs, but those wicked gays talked him into it. Mike Moore has a fantastic point because they do leave a lot of Freddie Mercury's life out of that movie. Have you seen the
I have, yeah.
Bohemian Rhapsody? Yeah. And I think that there's some good performances in there, but there's a whole, like, you might be able to walk away from Bohemian Rhapsody and think like, Freddie Mercury just he dabbled in gay stuff, but he was mostly bi. He was gay and he was involved in some very risky behavior, which unfortunately the time period he engaged in it is very likely what led to him being HIV positive. But you would think that one boyfriend of his is the one that's like, man, that guy got him to do everything.
Yeah.
So
I think it's similar, actually, that just, I guess I didn't realize how much you can very easily compare these sort of biopics. I looked a little bit more about Bernstein, and it seems like they left out a ton of stuff from his life. The thing that I thought was most left out of Maestro was, why did we just skip over West Side Story?
Yeah, I know.
That's like one of his hugest accomplishments. And I think they say at one time, I think he also had like some pretty big contributions at Harvard.
So
why did we not talk about it?
You're absolutely right about West Side Story. There's like, it's like, oh yeah, I'm working on this updated version of Romeo and Juliet. Oh, you mean West Side Story? It's like almost like, oh, let's hit people over the head as to what that is. But then we don't. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I don't want a whole movie about him making it, but I would have a couple minutes, It's
huge. I mean, that's, again, maybe we make that one conducting scene just a little bit shorter and we add just a little bit more dialogue about West Side Story.
Yeah. One of the, there's a lot of actors who pop up in this. And you had the same reaction I did because you messaged me. You're like, wait, Sarah Silverman's in this? And I was like, yeah, I like, because I had just watched it like earlier that day. And I was like, yeah, I had no idea. I literally had no idea that Sarah Silverman is in it. And she's like acting. She's not playing a comedian in the time period. It's not like the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel where she's just like, oh yeah, I'm just some female comedian. No, she's in it and she's acting. And I guess she's his sister who's still friends. But by the way, Mike Moore has a very funny joke for people who are self-aware of these things. The crazy thing is, all these years, I thought it was Leonard Bernstein. And Roz JD in the chat, Laura Silverman is the only one I'll watch. She used to have her sister on her sketch show. I thought her sister was pretty good. But anyway, talk about sort of that. And that happens a lot of times in movies. And look, there are times where comedians can win you over. But I mean, she was doing, this is not pun intended for the era that it's in, but a very broad character. And she's just sort of like that. Oh, you know how he is. And I don't know. I don't think she was terrible, but I wouldn't say she's good.
I think it was a poorly written character. I'm going to be honest. I think that some of the kind of ancillary characters that we get are boring and not well thought out. I don't know that there's like a background to her. I don't know that she was necessary in any way. Don't get me wrong. I lost my mind when I saw her and I was like, what the fuck, Sarah Silver? I literally paused the movie and messaged you. That was like my first series of events. I was completely shocked. So it was a super fun moment for me, but was it necessary in any way? No. Like what did she do? What did she add to the story?
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's, I think Sebastian Maniscalco was in Green Book, and he didn't have a huge part, but it was like a big Italian family. He was just one of those guys. And you're like, oh yeah, that works. You know, it wasn't like, oh, there's Sebastian, you know, what's he doing? You know, there are some people where it gets to be pretty hard to separate who they are. And Kyle with a great question. Was Sarah Silverman better in Maestro or in the 2-part epic episode of Star Trek Voyager? You're just trying to push my buttons, Kyle. You know how I feel about Star Trek Voyager. But honestly, she was probably better in this. She was definitely better in her sketch show, you know. And when she did that video for when she was dating Jimmy Kimmel and they did a song called I'm Fucking Matt Damon, she's great in that. She's very funny. I remember a time, it wasn't that long ago, that she was very funny. But when I was out your way in June on Who Are These Podcasts, Carl had some clips from her current podcast where it's just people leaving voicemails and they're really sad about life. And she's trying to talk to them and it's super serious.
Nope, I never do that.
You're a comedian, you know? I don't know. But
do you know what I liked her in though? She was good. Do you remember Greg the Bunny?
I do remember Greg the Bunny. Yeah.
Greg the Bunny.
Greg the Bunny was good. Seth Green was in that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a pretty good show. I forgot about that. See,
it was a great show.
That seems like something she's well suited to.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You were talking earlier about Bradley Cooper being very expressive in this and how perhaps he didn't need the prosthetic nose. I came across, I was going through my notes looking for something else, and I jotted down, Bradley Cooper makes a lot of Charlie Chaplin faces in this movie, which it's like, you know, the very big, broad, like, whoa, because there was no sound. So you had to really act with your face. And I think that, it doesn't take you out of it, but there's a lot of times where you're like, all right, buddy, you're at like a 9.5. Can you dial it down to like a 6? You know, this performance doesn't need to be that big at all times.
I do think though that it's pretty similar to how he really was conducting. I think he was pretty known for his very over the top, you know, exaggerated movements. So, you know, maybe that was an intentional choice.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right. I think that especially when it's sort of the early era, and you know, again, I didn't do the homework where I've gone and checked out YouTube videos of Leonard Bernstein, and maybe very well it was actually, you know, the same as that. I did notice when they started to age him up and make him older, I was like, wow, he looks a lot like George Hamilton. You know, he's not quite as tan, but I guess that's what Leonard Bernstein looked like.
Yeah.
But I find it to be an interesting movie. It has good performances, but I can also see why, you know, this poster that I've been putting up, it has some of the places that it did well. You know, the Venice Film Festival. Let's see, what else did it have? Spotlight Gala, New York. You know, it's an official selection for other festivals, but it's not running away with awards. And, you know, it's because I think I said this about a different movie. It's good, but this isn't great. There's definitely
I'm never going to watch it again.
Right, exactly. I can't imagine watching it again. And if somebody said, "Have you? Should I watch it?" I'd be like, "Well, what are the other nominated movies have you seen that you want to?" You
Yeah.
know, I mean, I was very critical on Oppenheimer to the extent, Cayley, that I had Tukey on our show to talk about it with me, and it's one of those things where it's just like, okay, but I would still say somebody should certainly
See it.
watch
Yeah.
Oppenheimer before this if you haven't seen it. But I, of course, you and I agree that this was the movie to watch. There are still others, but it's I don't know. What do you think it is about it? Is it something you can put your finger on? We've picked at a couple of little things. Is there something that makes you feel like, yeah, this movie isn't resounding with the people who vote on these things for a specific reason, or what are you thinking?
So I think that a big part of it is that if you know nothing about him, it's hard to just go into this movie. I
Sure.
felt like I needed to learn about him after this movie, but there wasn't that much more to learn about, or at least not
Right.
that much more that's interesting, unless you are a conductor or a composer or a pianist and are really interested in those things. I am none of those things. So, particularly, the subject matter wasn't something that I felt like I wanted to research after I was done. But I also
Right.
didn't really feel like I learned about him. And I think that the perfect example of that was that it wasn't until about 40 minutes into the movie that they do a radio interview thing with him. And that is where they kind of introduce his contributions to the world. So up
Right.
until that point, up until that 40-minute mark, if you don't know who he is, then why do we care about this guy?
Yeah.
And
No.
that's
It's a great
kind of
point.
at odds. You get to a point where it's like you either need to make it a movie that is entirely about his romantic life and his family life, or entirely about his professional life. And I think that I really struggled with the meshing of those two things. I think it would have been fine if they had chosen one or the other. But for me, the combination made the movie longer than it should have been. It made it a little bit less exciting than maybe it could have been.
Yeah, no, I think that that's definitely the case. It's like it's more that, look, there's movies that you see it and you go like, yeah, that maybe wasn't a bullseye, but it came really close. It really hit the mark. And this is like, it just kind of misses in a lot of ways, but it's not unwatchable. Like I said, I
Yeah.
like him. I think she's good in it. I think that they do a great job sort of handling the reality of, she still wants to entertain guests, and then she's there coughing up blood and into a tissue, and they don't really know what to do, and sort of, that sort of uncomfortability when you're around someone who's sick, the family getting together and dancing to records when they
Yeah.
know it's the last time they're going to be together. There's some very sweet, really well done, heartfelt stuff in it. But it's just such a mixture of like, oh, and then, he taught this class and he humiliated the wannabe conductor who he then like grinds with at a dance club, hopped up on something, he's so sweaty and he's, and it's just like, all right. I mean, it's part of his life, I guess, but it goes in a lot of different directions, I guess, is kind of what I'm thinking, Cayley.
Yeah.
And yeah. I do want to touch on, and I had sent this to you, and this is kind of a big part of it. This is from the only news source that I think any of us should trust, the Daily Mail. But it is an look. There's certainly truth to a lot of this, and for anyone watching, as I am sharing this, the sheer number of Daily Mail pop-ups. There's like 3 going as we're talking. And I've like zoomed in on the headline to try to cut down on some of it. But the headline is Bradley Cooper was Hollywood's golden boy, but after, quote, Jewface, bro, he's now sneered at for being desperate for an award. And as Cayley and I discussed, spending 6 years learning to conduct an orchestra. That quote we talked about actually was probably in here, so I think we'll probably get to it.
Oh, yeah.
Social media users have mocked the actor for his desperation to win an award. And, look, the article starts with making this point. There was a time where putting certain tropes in a movie meant the film was almost guaranteed to get nominated for all the top awards. And these tropes, making unfeasibly good-looking Hollywood stars look unattractive, which, by the way, even with that nose, he's still a good-looking gentleman.
He looked great.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't lean that way, but I feel like you're gonna be able to back me up. That Bradley Cooper at his current age looks very good. He doesn't look much worse with a big nose on him.
No.
And,
Maybe that's because I grew up surrounded by Jewish people, but he looked totally normal to me.
right, exactly.
As the makeup, the prosthetic was great. I
Yeah.
had to look at it. I was like, is it really?
Yeah, I mean, you could zoom in
It's
on
great.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they talk about, expending lots of time for method acting, and it's known as Oscar bait. And it appears moviegoers are no longer as naive as they once were when it comes to the Academy. So the phrase Oscar bait has become a symbol of ridicule, used increasingly to bash 9-time nominee Bradley Cooper, once Hollywood's golden boy, but suddenly disliked and sneered at by many as a result of his new picture, Maestro, a biopic of composer Leonard Bernstein. And they mentioned that, his breakthrough role was The Hangover. I thought he and Jennifer Lawrence were phenomenal in Silver Linings Playbook. I thought, I've seen him in a lot, I don't know that we need to talk about the subsequent Hangover movies or the A-Team, but in general, I mean, he used to have like a really small part on Alias, and I remember him from that. He's a good actor. In
great.
general, he's a good actor, and I mean, he's a great talking raccoon in those Guardians of the Galaxy movies. Now he just records it. I don't think he does any mocap stuff, but still. So I don't know. I don't think it's anything about him. I don't think that the tide has turned against him, but obviously clickbait works because, like Oscar bait, I did go and click on it, and we're sharing it here and we're talking about it. But I just think it's a movie that's not connecting with people the way that he thought it would, which honestly, as a filmmaker, is probably heartbreaking to some extent because you're like, oh, I really thought this was great, But I don't know. I don't feel like there's some backlash on Bradley Cooper. Do you?
No, not at all. I think there was a lot of discussion about should he have done the Jew face, but I don't think anybody was like, oh, ban Bradley Cooper. He's the worst. He'll never make another good movie. He'll never act again. I don't think anybody acted like that at any point in time.
Right, exactly. And, one of the points that, as we're talking, we mentioned there were just the nominations for the Oscars. So we haven't had the Oscar ceremony yet, but what we have had are the Golden Globes. So when Cillian Murphy won, he did, when I sent this to Cayley, as I mentioned, he did some of the best acting he's done in years, with just this look on his face of like, oh, I'm not devastated here. I'm not shattered by the fact that, the guy plays the father of the atomic bomb. And look, in a different year, maybe even last year, this movie could have run away with all the awards. I'd have to remind myself what won last year, but look, at least he's trying to be honest about it. The people who stand up and start clapping because they're acting like they're glad somebody else won, I think that's a fairly real reaction, even though he's like, I got to hold it all in because this is not what I expected, but I don't know. I mean, I guess people probably don't feel bad for him, but I look, when they had that cutaway, I do always try to look when they do those split screens on award shows. I'm like, who's going to lose, and you always try to look at the one. And sometimes some people are very funny about it. You can tell the people who are like legitimately don't really care. They have the people who don't think they're going to win, and then they can't believe it. And they're like, I didn't write a speech. I'm so sorry. I like those moments, Don't be so full of yourself. Thinking, I always use the example. It was the 1991 MTV Awards. Michael Stipe from REM showed up wearing 12 shirts because REM was nominated for 12 awards. So he was going to wear each of his messages each time he won. Well, they won like 4 or 5. So like at the end of the show, he has to like take off all the shirts. And I'm like, you asshole, you weren't going to win all of them. This is Shiny Happy People's not that good. All right. It's okay. But
wait, speaking of REM.
Yes.
How did you feel about the inclusion of End of the World as We Know It?
I think that his name's in that song, so obviously Leonard Bernstein. I mean, it's a moment for anybody. If you've
pop culture,
anybody who's tried to karaoke that song, which I have not, by the way, but anybody who has tried, that's the part where you're like, maybe I can get half a breath in there, the Leonard Bernstein. But I think that's the main reason they did it. And also like, oh, we're in the 80s now. But yeah, it was a little on the nose to have a song with the guy's name in it. You know what I mean?
Do you know what I hated the most about that?
What's that?
The scene where they play that song, it's him and okay, so it's right after his wife dies, and then he's in the car with another guy, and they're pulling up to the house, and the song plays for like a quarter of the second with his name being said. So clearly they were listening to it in the car, is the implication there. And I just wanted to be like, you're making it seem like he's conceded that he's listening to that song.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It just seemed like a very weird, I understand that that's a pop culture moment and that it's important that we talk about it, but everybody already knows that. You don't have to throw it in my face in this scene.
He's fairly conceded throughout the movie. Yeah, this is nothing new.
That's true. Very true.
But you're right. It doesn't teach us anything, but it's also like, I don't know. I mean, it's artistic license. We'll assume that the song's on the radio and he doesn't have like the cassette single on repeat, so that that's the only thing
queued up to that part.
Yeah. We were talking about how, as the Daily Mail usually does, there's a collection of internet comments that are featured in here. And so they include things like, man, Bradley Cooper is really desperate for that Oscar. I'm living over how Bradley Cooper has turned himself into a joke, all because he's so painfully desperate to win awards. There's a crying emoji. We need more of this, IDK. I find myself endeared by Bradley Cooper's desperate pursuit of artistic greatness, as if it can be achieved by sheer force of will. Bradley went over the top in preparation for his Maestro role and subtly dissed Cillian Murphy's prep for his role at one point. It seems obvious he was desperate for recognition awards for his acting, but he's probably not winning much, if anything. And but this doesn't have the one that I wanted. I wanted to see somebody who like really understood, but we kind of both hit the point. We kind of know. Oh yeah, but this is a good one. Bradley Cooper saying he worked for 6 years to learn how to accurately portray 6 minutes of conducting is like someone saying they've been working for years to master their air guitar skills.
So funny.
Yeah. Bradley Cooper is going to spend the next 6 years trying to perfect an Irish accent for his next role. And this is the one you mentioned, Cayley, from Matt S. Damon's. So not Matt Damon. So I watched the actual video of Leonard Bernstein conducting for Mahler Symphony No. 2 because I felt like something was off during Bradley Cooper's version. And Mr. Cooper, 6 years? And you couldn't even hit the downbeats. And the last one that I'll read is Cate Blanchett made the world Google to see if Lydia Tarr was a real person with her amazing performance. And Bradley Cooper does what toddlers do and mimics, only it doesn't take most toddlers 6 years. Obviously, in a lot of ways, the internet is undefeated in being obnoxious. But it's not really as simple as just doing that, And look, I think he's good in it. If he doesn't win any awards for any point, I think it's probably deserved. As much as I felt like, did you see Oppenheimer?
I haven't.
Okay, so it's a little long and it misses the mark into what's the most interesting part of the story. That's all I'll say. And Tukey didn't even watch it, believe it or not. I know that you would think that a puppet would actually go to the movies, but I guess Rocco said that he didn't want to go. I know Tukey wouldn't go, but anyway. So if anybody wants to see that episode, that was from over the summer. But I think that I can see that I mean, it's Christopher Nolan. You feel like there's movies that you're like, well, how could that not win? And I'm sure we can look at the list and figure out what would be this year's Green Book. But Kyle Bellardo talks about how Cooper has a shot at the Oscar. They love actors who play real roles and are also gay. If Bernstein had died of AIDS, he'd be a lock. I mean, I think that, again, I feel like you're invoking the Queen documentary, which the Queen documentary has a tremendous number of problems. Sacha Baron Cohen was originally in it, and then the guys from Queen were like, well, we're not going to really tell the real story. And so then he wasn't interesting. he wasn't interested in being in it, but it also it really bends the truth a lot. It's like, oh my God, Live Aid happened when they hadn't seen each other in years. No, they had been on tour like 2 months earlier. So, and then they like, oh, let's end the movie by doing like a full 3-song set from Live Aid. And I'm like, all right, I mean, yes, you recreated it and it was good, but do you need to just because you can? Are there biopics for musicians or maybe even, perhaps fictional musician movies that come to mind as sort of being similar to this in tone that you're like, oh, well, that was a great one? Because I'm not sure if I have one at the top of my head.
I'm sure that I have an answer to that, but I can't think of anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and a lot of times it has to do with like, how much do you like the subject? Like the Oliver Stone Doors movie probably isn't great, but it came out, I was like, I don't know, 15. And I'm like, this is the greatest movie I've ever seen, and, Val Kilmer actually did the singing. Kyle's following up on his thought, the Queen movie, Philadelphia, The Danish Girl, Dallas Buyers Club. So yeah, Kyle definitely had his pocket was loaded with references to, the guy who, the AIDS story. Absolutely. And
that was one of the other things that I thought was interesting that was omitted from Maestro. It's my understanding, I might have some of these details slightly wrong, but it's my understanding that at one point Leonard Bernstein left Felicia for, I think it was David. I can't remember. It's one of the guys that he was banging in this movie. Left his wife for him and then was gone from her for like a year. And then when he got back with his wife shortly after that, the guy died of AIDS. So this movie could have had the AIDS aspect in it.
See,
but
Kyle,
it did not.
If they were listening to Kyle, if Kyle was a consultant on this film, he would have been like, I think you really gotta deal with that.
Yeah.
I'm glad I popped back in on my notes because I was thinking about some of the visuals. There's a point where they're in their penthouse apartment, in New York, and it's Thanksgiving. And obviously it's, Hollywood magic all around. But the idea that it's like, come on, come look at Snoopy. And you see the Snoopy balloon go by, but he's so defeated from just, how messed up his life is. He misses the Snoopy balloon, but I was like,
that is the best scene in the movie.
And the Snoopy just comes in there. Yeah. And it's like, they're having sort of the fight that they've needed to have for years. It's very reminiscent of, people remember there's the argument that Tony and Carmela have in The Sopranos, which lead to them being divorced. And it's like, you don't quite see it coming in that show. You're like, obviously there's been problems, but it's like, as with any good argument, Cayley, it starts when you pull on a little thread and like, oh, wow, the whole thing gets unraveled. And I think that's a perfect example of like, there's a lot of good filmmaking in here,
There is.
And, getting it so that the Snoopy balloon comes by then. And again, I know that it's just, it's like a green screen or whatever. It still looks great,
It looks so great. It was such a good pop culture reference. It was such a voyeuristic argument for me to watch that scene. You feel like you're sitting in the room with them. And then Snoopy going by the window makes it feel even more like that. You don't know if you're watching TV, if you're watching them, it's just like this whole mess of emotions where I was so uncomfortable. I feel like I was like sweating when I watched that scene because it was so tense and it was great. It was beautiful. I loved that scene. That was my favorite scene.
Yeah, there were definitely times where I felt as sweaty as Bradley Cooper was conducting, the actual the actual scenes in there. And I just wanted to, okay. So interestingly, so if there were to be an award that this would seem like it would have the real chance to win, it's apparently it's best original screenplay, which when your film's a biopic, I guess if it's not related to a book, if it's not based on a book, I guess that's all right. So that is one of the Oscars that I could see it winning. But is it also like, because Oppenheimer is adapted from a book, and Anatomy of a Fall is one of those movies that you hear about when it's like, and here's all these movies nominated. I'm like, I don't know what that movie is. I don't know who's in it. I don't know anybody who's seen it. May, December, I know because it's also on Netflix. It's Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore, but I feel like this could win. I don't know. There could be some. It probably doesn't even have original musical score, so I don't even know if it could be nominated for that. But I don't see him winning an actor, director, or certainly not a Best Picture for this.
I would agree with you.
Yeah. But it's not going to run away with the Razzies either. It's not that kind of a movie. Of the movies that are, that tend to be, the favorites right now, have you seen many of the Oscar movies? I've got a few to catch up. It seems like you saw Poor Things.
Almost nothing. Yeah. I'm so behind in 2023. This was just a super, super challenging year for me to actually sit down and watch movies that I hadn't seen before. Right. I'm usually about 2 or 3 years behind on all movies. That's just like my general norm. I got to get caught up one of these days. So I've seen almost nothing. I've seen Poor Things, and I think that's the only other nominated thing that I've actually seen so far, which is crazy. Usually I do better than that.
Well, we're at the point where stuff like for our audience as well, The Holdovers is on Peacock at this point, I'm told, and Kyle said it's Paul Giamatti's Oscar to lose this year. I mean, when he didn't win for playing Pig Virus in the Howard Stern movie Private Parts, obviously I think he's won since then, but he still has to win that one back. I think that there's a lot where you can see, and a lot of times with the award shows, I will play that game when I'm watching it with my wife, when we're actually watching it live. When I've had it all spoiled on Twitter, it's not as fun, but I'll just blurt out what I think is going to win. And sometimes I'm right, and sometimes my guess is very unpopular because I'm not going with the thing that everybody thinks should win. But it can be hard to keep up on movies, even when they bring them into our house, as we're talking about, when you don't need to go to the theater and have Nicole Kidman welcome you there as you take it all in. But the example I always use is my son will be 9 this year, and just because of exactly when he was born in the summer, we spent years where my wife and I were an entire Mission Impossible movie behind. Because they come out like every 3-4 years, and it was like the new one was coming out. I'm like, oh wait a minute, we never saw the last one because we were going to go see it, and then he came early, and it's like, so I was determined last year. I'm like, we got to catch up with Mission Impossible movies. It's a lot harder to be motivated for we have to get to all of the Oscar bait recommended critics' darling movies. It has to be something that really jumps out, at you. And what was it that intrigued you about Poor Things? Because it seems like a movie that still a lot of people haven't seen.
I'm a huge fan of, I can't pronounce his name, Yorgos Lanthimos.
The director.
I can't pronounce his name. I think he's absolutely incredible. He's one of my favorite directors. I think he's going to do amazing stuff. So that was my number one. I also think that Emma Stone has been absolutely outstanding in everything that she's done recently. I mean, she is constantly astounding me. I keep wanting to not like her, and then I just love everything that she does.
I mean, she's so good. I almost finished La La Land. That's how good she is. I almost got all the way to the end of it, but I just couldn't bring myself. No, but I mean, you go back, and I thought that she was playing a high schooler, but she did that movie Easy A about that was the takeoff.
It's great.
It's a fantastic movie. My wife and I were once, I don't know where we were on vacation, but it sort of came on TV, and we were gonna go out, and we were just I kind of want to watch this through to the end, because that's good. Obviously, me being a huge nerd, I loved her as Gwen Stacy in the Spider-Man movies with Andrew Garfield. People can say what they want about those movies, but the two of them on screen together, I always thought were great. Yeah, she's
outstanding.
She's great, and she seems to have a pretty good sense of humor about herself and everything. So, she's somebody that I think people tend to pull for until she spends 6 years learning how to do something, and she makes an Oscar bait movie, and then everybody's like, "Oh,
I can't wait until Emma Stone does Junos." It's gonna be great. I'm so excited for that day in my life.
That should be the long title for this episode. I can't wait till Emma Stone does Junos. Well, Cayley, it has been delightful getting the chance to talk to you and bring you to our Bladtcast audience. And as we mentioned, you're part of the midweek gang over at Who Are These Podcasts, and I've mentioned to Carl that I like the idea of mixing it up a little bit. You, Carl, and Trucker Andy, who has been a guest on Who Are These Broadcasters, and he, you know what, let's plug his show, All Apologies Podcast, because I told him when he started doing it, I love the idea of every week you focus on a different apology. So
he's killing it right now too. Yeah. It's amazing.
But I love the idea that you guys, you pick a category and everybody's like, all right, I tried to find the worst one. And as the three of you go through, usually the first one, you're like, oh, well, this one's definitely going to win. And some weeks it does, but then you're like, no, this one's so much worse. And there's so many different levels of talking about bad podcasts. And, the show I do, Who Are These Broadcasters? It's like you kind of come around to like, oh, this person is not a bad broadcaster, but I kind of like whatever their energy is. You try to figure it out.
A lot of the time when I'm looking for the bad podcasts, I end up with like not hate listening, and I'm like, wait, no, I'm enjoying it. I can't pick this one.
Did you bring the one with the really weird guy doing movie reviews, like in his house, and his co-host never wanted to be there, or was that might have been a Carl?
That was Carl back in the day. That was Doug from Cinema Recall, and I'm actually doing a movie review with him. I think I'm going to be reviewing Dogtooth with him. Which is another Yorgos Lanthimos. I'm not even trying. Yeah, that guy.
The Poor Things director.
The Poor Things director. And I'm really excited.
I think I messaged you when I was trying to set this up with you. You recently, maybe it was last week, maybe it was the week before, you found a podcast with a woman who collects dolls that are realistic and they poop, and there's this expectation, and you're like, oh, it's kind of sad. This is probably people that can't have kids. And then there's a reveal of like, nope, they have kids, but they ignore them to play with their dolls. And you're like, okay, that's sad in a different way entirely. So there's so much you can learn about the human condition by tuning into Who Are These Podcasts.
Yeah.
And and let's tell people again where they can find Once Over with Cayley for your movie reviews.
Yeah, absolutely. So for Who Are These Podcasts, you can listen on Wednesday nights. That's the midweek episode, and it's great. So I'll be on there tomorrow. And then for Once Over with Cayley, you can find me on YouTube at Once Over with Cayley, and Cayley is spelled Cayley for lots of fun movie reviews and lots of stuff like this. So
what are a couple of the movies that have gone up over there recently?
So I just recently released The Hunt for the Wilder People. I did The Tingler, so some nice classic William Castle horror from the 1950s. I also recently did The Hills Have Eyes, the original. Lots of horror, I basically just do whatever I'm in the mood for.
Yeah.
Coming up soon is going to be the movie Hesher, which came out in 2010. That I think is very underrated and an excellent movie. So that one will be exciting.
I don't even know what that movie is. So it's
great.
It's very underrated to me because I don't know it. And yeah, I think a lot of time when, you talk to people about doing a podcast, it should always be, what are you interested in? What seems fun to you? And that's why we're coming on actually right now. I think today might even be the day now that I think about it. This is the 11 years we've been doing the Bladtcast. And that's why we've built a very loyal audience, but it hasn't expanded that much because it's not always the same thing, but it's always like whatever I feel like doing. And our next episode, I'm going to talk to Zach Schaefer from $2 Late Fee, which is a podcast that really focuses on 80s movies. But we're going to kind of go back. We talked about doing this for like the summer movie season, and we thought about doing it at the end of the year. Well, it's still going to look at 2023. We're going to talk about a lot of movies. And so you can find that in our next episode. That'll be Bladtcast 581. And final comment in the chat from Kyle Bellardo. Usually we're talking about the Who Are These Podcasts competition. Usually Lucy brings good podcasts, but Carl wins this week for queer kids stuff. Woof. That's a show that they highlighted on Who Are These Socials. And I had to write to him after. It's just... you try to not be surprised sometimes, but then when you're like, wow, people really put crazy stuff on the internet, don't they? And
Yeah,
oh my gosh, Raging Rhino says, congrats on 11 years, Christian. And I'm sorry, Cayley, I spoke over. What were you going to say?
Well, I'm going to steal Raging Rhino's comment first. Congratulations. Absolutely amazing. You're doing so much amazing stuff. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, for our 10th anniversary, I had Carl pull clips from our first episode and make fun of me. And he said, this is weird doing it to someone's face. I'm being a lot nicer. And I'm like, oh, this is you being nice. So I'm glad you're doing it to my face. But like, I knew that my first episode wasn't great, from 2013. In any case, so you can follow me on social media at Christian DMZ. Subscribe to the Bladtcast YouTube, BLADTCAST. And as Cayley was telling me beforehand, there's a lot of interviews on there, musicians, comedians. You just scroll through, you'll probably find somebody that you're interested in, and we'll have more of those coming up very soon. Hopefully talking to Jack Blades in the near future. The problem with that is I always want to talk to these guys about damn Yankees. Like I wouldn't want to talk to Tommy Shaw about sticks. I'd want to talk to him about damn Yankees. I once talked to Ted Nugent and I carved out a good 10 minutes to talk to him about damn Yankees. And that's, yeah, we all have our sweet spots, Cayley.
I get it.
Yeah. So please do that. Please subscribe wherever. And we will see you next time on the Bladtcast.